All right. So after week one in the NFL, we did the show. We talked about guys that were letdowns or guys that played really well. And so what did we see in week two that was different than week one? And so let's go through a few different players. And so how about Mike Evans? Big turnaround to week two, ended up wide receiver 3, over 30 fantasy points, 6 catches. T. Higgins, big letdown in week one, wide receiver 4, over 30 fantasy points. Drake London, a big 0 week one, gets into the end zone for Atlanta. Not necessarily a huge high-powered passing offense, but Drake London still did well. Christian Kirk in Jacksonville, the forgotten man. Well, it swapped. Calvin Ridley was the forgotten man. And Christian Kirk, how many catches did he have? 11 catches, 110 yards, and then 2 catches for Calvin Ridley. San Francisco, Deebo Samuel, the forgotten man. Brandon Ayuk was the hero. That switched. Ayuk got a little banged up. That was part of the reason why. But Samuel finished as a top 14 wide receiver with almost 25 fantasy points. So of the wide receivers and kind of the surprises or flip-flops from week one, what jumped out to you, Harrison?
I think the biggest thing that jumped out to me was Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley's switch, because it wasn't that, both of those guys were getting targeted and that, the catches just weren't coming for Kirk. Ridley was the focal point of the offense, and Kirk, I believe, only had 4 or 5 targets in week one. That completely switched to week two, obviously, like you said, with 11 receptions, a huge uptick in volume. The T. Higgins one isn't as surprising to me because even though he did not catch a pass week one, the Bengals offense was a mess and he still had 8 targets. So they were still looking his way. The 8 catches and 2 touchdowns this week, he just had more conversions on those targets. But I think the Jacksonville offense is really interesting because going into the season, we loved how many weapons there were there, and we wanted pieces of the Jacksonville offense. And I think this just comes along with that of, hey, we don't know who's going to be the guy every week in the passing offense that's going to go off for them. It is going to be a very heavy matchup-dependent system for them. If Christian Kirk has a good matchup in the slot, they're going to be peppering him with targets. If Calvin Ridley has a good matchup on the outside, it's going to be his day. Evan Ingram's getting involved on specific drives as well. So I think Jacksonville is definitely the team to look out for with which wide receiver you want to start each week. Zay Jones was involved week one, then didn't really have a great game week two. He did have 2 almost near touchdown catches in the end zone where his toe was out of bounds or his heel was out of bounds. So that obviously would have changed things for his day. But I think that's a really interesting wide receiver room to look forward to for the rest of the season.
Now, I will say along those lines, though, I'm all in on Jacksonville. But the concern for Trevor Lawrence, I don't understand what happened against Kansas City as far as he just wasn't productive near the red zone, in the red zone, scoring touchdowns. That was the big disappointment for that game in general. I mean, Kansas City and Jacksonville, I watched a good bit of that game. There wasn't enough offense or scoring and like we anticipated or thought that there could be. And so we'll begin our segment, Peace or Panic. I think I know the answer to this, but is there any panic with Trevor Lawrence? And I guess the panic for me is I'd like to see him run a little bit more, get a little bit more action on the ground. That would help. Maybe, keep defenses honest. So there's some concern there. And then the lack of touchdowns, definitely concern. But overall, still have peace about Lawrence.